The first thing Marcus Chen noticed wasn't the pain, though his skull felt like it had been cracked open with a hammer. It wasn't the sterile blue-white light that made his eyes water, or even the fact that he was strapped to what looked like a metallic operating table. No, the first thing that caught his attention was the smell. Ozone, burnt circuits, and something else, something organic and wrong. He kept his breathing steady, his eyes barely cracked open, taking in his surroundings through his lashes. The room was pristine, all smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to flow into each other like liquid metal frozen in time. Banks of equipment hummed quietly along the walls, their purposes unknown but their intent clear enough. This was a laboratory and he was the specimen. 3 figures moved around the room, their forms tall and impossibly thin with elongated limbs that bent at too many joints. Their skin, if it could be called that, was a translucent gray that revealed the slow pulse of bioluminescent organs beneath. The Vexthari. Marcus had seen their kind before during the First Contact Wars. He'd hoped never to see them again. One of them approached his table, holding what looked like a crystalline probe that sparked with energy. It began speaking in their musical language, a series of harmonic tones that would have been beautiful if Marcus didn't know they were discussing which part of him to dissect first. The alien reached toward his forehead with the probe. Marcus struck. His right hand tore free from the restraint. The aliens had clearly never dealt with a species that could dislocate their own thumbs. The probe shattered against the wall as Marcus's fist connected with the creature's elongated skull. The alien dropped like a sack of wet cement. The other 2 reacted with typical Vexthari efficiency, reaching for communication devices. Marcus rolled off the table, his bare feet hitting the cold floor as he freed his other hand. A lifetime of military training kicked in, muscle memory overriding the disorientation of whatever drugs they'd pumped into him. The second alien managed to activate some kind of alarm before Marcus reached it. A haunting wail filled the laboratory as he grabbed the creature by its spindly neck and used it as a shield against the third alien's energy weapon. The blast meant for Marcus instead vaporized his captive, filling the air with the acrid stench of burned flesh. "Big mistake," Marcus growled, diving behind a bank of equipment as more energy bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing. The remaining alien chittered something in its language, probably calling for backup. Marcus knew he had maybe 2 minutes before this place would be crawling with guards. He needed weapons, and he needed them now. The laboratory was full of delicate instruments, but Marcus had learned long ago that human ingenuity could turn anything into a weapon. He grabbed a handful of the crystalline probes, their surfaces still crackling with energy. When the alien peered around its cover, Marcus hurled them like throwing stars. The creature shrieked as the probes embedded themselves in its torso, electrical discharge coursing through its body. Heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Marcus quickly examined the fallen alien's equipment. Their weapons were biometrically locked, but their tool belts contained other useful items. He pocketed several small devices, grabbed a container of what looked like acid, and positioned himself behind the door. The first guard through the entrance got a face full of alien acid. Its agonized scream sent the others scrambling back into the corridor, buying Marcus precious seconds. He used them to overturn equipment, creating barricades and, more importantly, causing several volatile chemical reactions. The Vexithari had always prided themselves on their advanced technology and superior intellect. What they'd never understood about humans was that intelligence without adaptability was just elaborate suicide. They built perfect laboratories with perfect security systems, but they'd never planned for a test subject who'd turn their own equipment against them. Marcus triggered another explosion, this one bringing down part of the ceiling. Debris and sparking conduits turned the pristine laboratory into a war zone. He could hear the aliens in the corridor, their harmonic voices rising in what sounded like panic. Good. Panic was the enemy of their vaunted efficiency. He found what he was looking for in the wreckage, a maintenance shaft partially exposed by the collapse. As he squeezed into the narrow space, energy bolts started flying again. The aliens had finally worked up the courage to advance. The shaft led to a ventilation system that carried him deeper into their ship. Marcus had been on Vexithari vessels before during the war. Their ships were marvels of engineering, but they all followed the same basic design principles. And more importantly, they all had the same critical weakness. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in the ship's engineering section, surrounded by the unconscious forms of the engineering crew. The Vexthari emergency protocols had locked down this section when he'd triggered the laboratory explosions, trapping the engineers inside with him. They'd expected a damaged test subject, not a one-man army with detailed knowledge of their technology's vulnerabilities. He placed his hand on the primary control interface, which had been keyed to Vexithari biology but wasn't smart enough to distinguish between species when presented with the proper electrical signature, helpfully provided by one of the devices he'd taken from his captors. "Computer," he said in accented Vexithari. "Initiate emergency separation of laboratory section." The ship's AI, designed for efficiency above all else, complied without question. The laboratory section, along with most of the Vexthari aboard, separated from the main vessel and began drifting toward the nearby star. Marcus settled into the engineering station and began plotting a course for Earth. The Vexithari had made two critical errors in their assessment of humanity. First, they'd assumed that superior technology made them superior warriors. Second, they'd forgotten that humans had been turning hopeless situations into victories since they'd first picked up rocks to fight saber-toothed tigers. As the stars wheeled around him and the ship's engines hummed with stolen purpose, Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. The aliens had wanted to study human adaptability and resilience in controlled laboratory conditions. He'd given them a practical demonstration instead. The war wasn't over. It might never be over. But today, one human had reminded the galaxy why his species refused to stay down when knocked down. Today, the laboratory had become a battlefield, and the specimen had become the victor. Behind him, drifting in the darkness of space, the separated laboratory section continued its inexorable journey toward the star, taking its secrets and its would-be conquerors with it into the fire. Humanity had sent its message, written in flames across the void. "We are not your test subjects. We are not your victims. We are your reckoning."